I can think of about 2 to 3 different ways to stitch most sewing techniques, yet I generally just choose one method. What do I choose? Well, the absolute easiest way, of course. Over the years, I've tweaked sewing and quilting techniques not only to be easy, but to give the best looking results. With this 3-part series, I'll share the absolute easiest way to sew. Let's start with pattern layout, cutting, and marking. Then learn ways to streamline and improve your sewing skills. The absolute easiest way to sew, that's what's next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, making a difference in sewing, quilting, crafting, and needle arts for over 30 years. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
Layout, cutting, and marking are the basics to start with for almost any sewing project, whether it's for clothing or for accessories or crafts. And you can usually check the guide sheet for a rough layout. This is certainly workable, but easier would be to just lay out roughly the biggest pieces followed by the smallest pieces, and that's generally how I work. The grain line is probably the most important marking for layout. And the grain line on many patterns is very short. It doesn't extend the full length of the pattern piece. So I fold the fabric in half along that grain line and then just finger press, crease it so that I have the line extended. I've done that on all my pattern pieces, and I have my fabric that I'm going to make these little shorts out of. And I've folded the fabric, refolded it so that the fabric edges meet, rather than the fabric the way it was folded from the bolt, because that may change quite a bit. So you want those edges to meet, repress it so that you have a nice fold at the top area so that it's crisp. Then roughly lay out the big pattern pieces. So I just have a front and a back of these shorts, and then I'll place in the smaller pieces. So let's see, that one goes here, I think, and then here we go, this should fit in this area. After you've roughly placed everything up, put each pattern piece on grain, and I use 2 pins measured to the fold, the new fold that I've created. So I'll see where this crease is, and it's about 14 3/4 inches. So I'll place a pin along the grain line and then measure down another 14 3/4 inches. And notice that I'm using a ruler. Tape measures are great, but this is much more stable and quicker to work with, getting the pattern pieces on grain. So then I would do the next piece. This one is very short, and notice that the whole width of the ruler kind of I can align it the whole width of the ruler so that I only have to measure one time. So you do the same thing on all the other pattern pieces, getting the grain line anchored. Then you can use pattern weights, if you'd like, for something kind of quick to place around the edges. Now, unfortunately, because I'm on an angle, they're going to slide right off. So I'd put a couple pattern weights on each piece and then do the cutting. Or if you didn't have pattern weights, certainly what you could do is just pin at each corner. I usually pin at a 45-degree angle. I don't put a lot of pins in. I don't think it's necessary. Now when you cut with long strides, just long, smooth strides. And it's obviously kind of tricky to cut on this angle, but you get the idea. If you're working with a small pattern piece and you have a mat large enough, then use a rotary cutter, ruler, and mat, and just cut along the edge. With this smaller blade, you'll be able to cut around the curves much more readily. I cut out another pattern piece section of all of this shorts pattern. I'm going to show you just some quick marking ideas. For marking, we're going to work with the front. Let's see, I got it right here. And the notches. The notches are these little markings at the side that you usually clip. Just tiny little 1/8 of an inch clips at each marking. Clip, clip. Not very deep, you don't want it to go very deep, but they're accurate markings. On many fabrics where you want more noticeable markings for notches, I use a notcher, and this gives a much deeper notch. Actually takes out some fabric. Clip goes out, and you see a much deeper mark that you'll be able to align it. And those are quick ideas for layout, cutting, and marking. Do darts have you in a dither? Here's how to use an index card or sticky notes as a sewing guide for effortless dart stitching. It's the absolute easiest technique that I know. A dart, simple for shaping kids' wear, children's wear, traditional place to find a dart at the underarm area on a woman's top. But to get it straight and to prevent the threads at the end from untangling are the criteria that I worked with for this easy technique. You'll mark the dart legs, the end of the dart legs, with little nips like those 1/4-inch clips that I showed you for the notches, and then I just place a dot at the tip of the dart on the wrong side of the fabric. And that's what I have on this particular sample. Here's the dot at the end, and then I place nips at the dart legs. Match those nips for the dart legs, and find that dot, fold the fabric, just one fold, there we go, and align everything up, and pin between the nips and the dart point. And that's what's exactly happened on this side of the fabric. Then go to your sewing machine, set for a straight stitch, and we'll start at always sew from the widest to the narrowest, lower the presser foot, and then take one stitch, so sinking the needle right at the dart legs. And you can, if you wanted to, you could just stitch 1 or 2 stitches. Remove the pin, then raise the presser foot. And either with an index card, first I'll butt the index card right next to the needle and align it at the tip of the dart. I have a kind of a short index card, so I'll just sew 1 or 2 stitches more, line it up, and I'd get it right lined up. Or you can use the sticky notes, take about 3 or 4 at a time to lengthen this, and I'll just put them together, and then I can for sure get a long length and place it, and there we go. We have the stitching line. Then sew along the sticky note, the index card, just with a straight stitch, and I'll just speed it up a little bit. There we go. And now slow her down as you get to the dart point. And as you get there, I'll take out the pin. I'll take 2 or 3 stitches at the very edge. Now normally you would clip your threads at this point. That's not going to work because sometimes it comes undone. So sew off the fabric. You don't have to get quite as long of a chain as I have here, but now the next step is to raise the foot and stitch in the dart underlay. Just stitch in the part that's not going to be, and back stitch. I'll just do a little back stitch to lock those threads so you don't have to tie them, and then you can cut the dart. And as I take this off, I'll just take off my sticky notes, you'll see this little dart underlay and the straight dart. One size does not fit all when it comes to gathering. The type of fabric, the width of the seam allowance, and the project dictate the absolute easiest way to add gathers. Here are a couple of options. This top that you just saw was created, the gathers were created with the traditional 2 rows of basting threads, and I'm going to give you some insights on how we did this very evenly. I will sew from the right side of the fabric and choose a different thread color for the bobbin. I've black in the bobbin and a contrasting thread in the top for you to see more easily. The bobbin thread is what pulls easiest of a sewn seam. We're working with 5/8 of an inch seam allowances, so I'm going to lower the presser foot, stitch a stitch or 2, and then back stitch to lock one end of the seam. Then with the basting stitch, sew the edge of the fabric. 3.0 to 3.5 millimeters is generally what I use. You'll be sewing a much longer fabric piece, I'm sure. Then raise the needle, raise the presser foot. Don't use the automatic thread cutter because you need threads to pull the gathers, then cut the threads. Sew a second seam within that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, lower the presser foot, stitch a stitch or 2, back stitch. Here we go, let's hit the right button, there we are, and then sew again, right next to the previously sewn seam. Raise the needle, press your foot, cut the threads however you'd like to cut them. And then when you go to the wrong side of the fabric, you have the bobbin threads. The black ones are easier to find because they're contrasting or a different color, and then pull. You don't have to worry about anchoring the opposite end because you've back stitched and locked them. So again, you're going to have a bigger piece of fabric, but that's the best way to work with it. This is great for medium weight fabrics. For lightweight fabrics, I add a second row of stitching. You wonder why? Well, here's a sheer. It's kind of out of control. If you stitch with 3 rows within that seam allowance, it has greater control and lies flatter. Just a hint from me. If you have 1/4 of an inch seam allowances, try using your serger, a basic overlock stitch to do the stitching. Again, you may want to use contrasting thread. You're going to be pulling the needle thread. So I have a contrasting thread in the needles. And here's a close-up of just serging the overlock seam within the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, or excuse me, the 1/4 of an inch seam allowances. Here we have the sewn seam. On one end, the end you're going to gather, you're going to clip the threads for about 1 inch long, and then pull out the black or the needle threads with a pin to separate the overlock stitch. At the opposite end, wrap the thread tail around a pin and gather, and you get really even gathers. It works so well, and I like this technique. Children's wear, lightweight fabrics, you can fuse instead of stitch. And the fusible tape has blue threads in it that you can gather. I've already fused a tape to the wrong side of the fabric. You're going to look for the blue threads. Notice that the tape extends beyond the fabric. That's where I pull up the blue threads. You'd anchor the thread at the opposite end, as we have here. We wrap the extra thread in figure-8 style around a pin and then pull the blue threads. This is great for quick projects, not for heavyweight fabrics, mind you, but for lightweight kids wear. You really can't beat it for a fast way of working with gathers. So here we have the absolute easiest way of working with 3 types of gathering. When adding elastic to loungewear, sleepwear, or sportswear, you'll find this by far the simplest way to sew casing. Changing the rules is part of the sewing game. The rules I'm referring to are shown on this loungewear pair of shorts. The casing at the top usually has an opening left along the lower edge so that the elastic can be inserted and then later stitched. It's kind of cumbersome to work with. This pair of shorts is kind of working as one of my samples as well, the last step of the sample, and you can see elastic, this is not the way it's going to be when you wear it, is coming out of the opening that I'm going to leave, and I'll show you what happens with this. I'd also like to show you that the elastic is not overlapped and stitched together, but rather stitched to a woven piece of fabric that later I'll trim off the excess little piece so that this is a flat piece. It doesn't have little bunchies on the side. So you'll see how this works, and notice it's coming out of a little window. So to create the casing, you'll measure or find on your pattern that will say, for example, 1.5 inch casing, press under. And do that pressing prior to sewing the seams so that, let's get it on the correct side, and you put in a little memory of pressing in the hem. It's easier to press something flat than when it's sewn into a circle. So press each piece flat. Then sew the side seams or the center, front, and back seams. With the exception of one of the seams, you'll need to leave an opening. And on this sample, I'll show the opening that's needed, and you can see the press mark where the casing top is, and then I lock the stitches back and forth, and then leave an opening, and then the very edge, the 1/4 of an inch at the edge, do the stitching again so that it's unsewn where the elastic is going to be inserted. The elastic is put into the casing with a safety pin some people use, or I like to use an elastic glide to place it into the casing. And what often happens is when you're This is sewn and the elastic glide goes through the casing. It gets hung up on the seam allowances. So before stitching that casing, we do some basting. A basting stitch, long stitch, sewing down the seam allowances, and then again double the length of the casing, and then once again. You'll take that stitching out after a while, but it really will save you time. Then fold under the casing. Stitch a little bit from the top and along the lower edge, and that's just what this sample shows, that the casing has been created. Probably the longest part of creating this elastic casing is to thread it through, depending how large the opening is or large the waistline is. Well, really what I want to share with you is that as I'm getting eventually to the side seam, the glide goes right over underneath this because the seams have been basted down. So you go all the way through the casing. And you'll see at the end of the elastic that I have zigzagged the elastic to a woven piece of fabric. Then when the two ends come out to meet each other, you zigzag the opposite end to the fabric. And this has been zigzagged, and trim away the excess fabric. So it's now nice and flat. And as I mentioned, this is my last sample, and notice, presto, the elastic slips into place and you don't have to do any final stitching. Okay, I realize this shot of the waistline doesn't look like much. Well, that's the point. It's the easiest way to sew elastic to a waistline without the telltale top stitching of an elastic waistband. It's great for knits. Here's how. When you look at this skirt that can be made in about an hour of time, when you wear it, it drapes nicely from the waistline without that top stitching edge around the lower portion of the elastic. I borrowed this technique from Ready Made, purchased a skirt, saw it made like this, and thought, I have to share this with you. The elastic stays in place at the side seams because we stitched in the ditch, stitch in the groove of the seam to hold the elastic down in just a few places, so that when you're wearing it, it looks nice without that stitching. And you don't have to worry about getting it stitched straight either. We just finished with a casing in sportswear where it's woven fabrics. This is great for knits in this instance. We're going to use the same elastic idea, but this time connecting the elastic right away, right off the top before we sew it in. So you can see I've stitched this to the elastic little woven piece of fabric. Then you trim off the extra fabric and it's flat. It doesn't have the bump or the lump when you normally would overlap elastic and stitch it. Then divide the elastic in half, divide it in half again, put pins at the quarter marks. We're using the seam as one of the quarter marks. Also quarter mark the waistline of the skirt or pants. And you can use, if it works out, the side seams as two of the quarter marks. Then you pin quarter marks together from the wrong side of the fabric. So let me get things organized here. So from the wrong side of the fabric, we're just going to meet the cut edges and pin 4 times around this small little sample. And I'm going to sew a portion of this for you right now. So you meet together. Now we're going to set the machine as a zigzag stitch. And the zigzag stitch that you have, you can do some testing, but I have a width of 3.5 and a short length, about 1.8. These are all in millimeters, and that's the way all sewing machines are calibrated. So we'll start by stitching from the elastic side. Use a needle, like a stretch needle, that we generally would use for knits. Excuse me, let me get that pin out of there. And do a few anchor stitches. Then stretch the elastic to meet the fabric. Make sure the edges are meeting and sew. You could also, if you'd like, serge this. If you are a serger owner, you're going to do this with the blade raised so that you don't have to worry about trimming or cutting any of the elastic. And then I'll do a little bit more just to show you, and I did not match these up, but I can do that right now. Just pin and stretch. Now as I'm rounding the bend here, you'll just see you just keep on going around and around and around until you've sewn the elastic around the whole edge. And presto, I have a sample with it already done. Now to attach the elastic so it doesn't flip forward, fold the elastic to the underside and pin. And from the right side, stitch in the ditch, stitch in the groove, just a straight stitch in the seam to hold that elastic in place, and you're done. Do you and your fabric-loving friends have an abundance of fabric? Consider sharing fabrics with your community using the Charity Sharity group as your model. The founder of the St. Louis group is Carol Splater, who joins us via Skype. Welcome to Sewing with Nancy, Carol.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Charity Sharity is a unique model that you and your friends have been working on for many years. Give our viewers an overview of Charity Sharity.
In Charity Sharity, we collect donated fabric. People donate fabric to us that they no longer want or they no longer need, or perhaps they die and their children clean out the sewing room. We then turn around and give it to many charities, people that use it in service of others. We concentrate on not-for-profit groups, but anybody that's in education or the arts is also gets fabric from us.
You've been doing this a long time.
We've been doing it about 14 years. We're not exactly sure when it started because we started out sharing with each other and it gradually grew into what it is.
I find this a unique model because you're encouraging the viewers to do something like this in their community. You don't want them to ship the fabric to you in St. Louis. Give our viewers some tips on how you and your friends share with fabrics with others.
If you are going to start, if you have an abundance of fabric, I think that you do want to share it and you don't know where to go. A lot of people just dump it into the Goodwill bin, and that's really not the place to take it. So you need to, first of all, find out that you do have a lot of fabric. And then finding places to take it. There are places that you may not dream of. Hospital auxiliaries, churches, military support groups. The schools are wonderful places to take fabric. Theater groups. And there are just, we've uncovered so many more that we didn't dream were there.
Now you get the fabric and then you sort it in your basement.
We do.
Tell our viewers how you and your friends on Thursdays do the sorting.
We do the sorting. Most of it comes in bags or boxes, and we take a bag or a box and we put it on the table and we sort according to fiber. All the cottons go together, all of the garment fabric. We have a notions department that's phenomenal. We sort it that way, and we also sort by size because a group that's making small little stuffed bears will not need 3 yards. You know, we give those the smaller pieces, and then we have quilters, and we have all different needs among the places that take the fabric.
And then you put them in bags, large bags, and then tell our viewers, I think this is so fascinating, where the drop-off center is. My
front porch.
Your front porch.
My front porch is the donation center, and I don't have to be home. They just put it on the porch, and then they pick groups that pick up fabric, pick it up from my porch, and it's labeled 13-gallon white trash bags.
It's interesting the weight of fabric that you have given away, that you have shared in the last 14 years. Your husband, you told me yesterday, determined the weight. So share that, please.
Well, and especially in the last 4 or 5 years, we have moved in and out of my house between 12 and 15 tons of fabric. And that translates to 1,000 or more white trash bags. And we think it's so amazing that not only did we move 15 tons into the house, we were able to give away 15 tons.
You and your friends have done a remarkable job of sharing fabric and being very generous to the community and making sewing accessible to many. Carol, I thank you for being my guest.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If you'd like to watch this program again or any of the past 3 seasons of Sewing with Nancy programs, you can watch it online at nancyzeman.com. You can also join us on social media, blogs, Facebook, or Instagram by following along, clicking on those icons. Well, this concludes our first program of our 3-part series on the absolute easiest way to sew. We'll be back again with 2 other programs of this series. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.
Nancy Zeman has written a fully illustrated book entitled The Absolute Easiest Way to Sew, which includes all the techniques featured in this 3-part series. It's $19.99 plus shipping and handling. To order the book, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2816. Order item number BK2816, The Absolute Easiest Way to Sew. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzeman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest-airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zeman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Pellon. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zeman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.